Now, for those of you who can remember the early days of my channel after The Force Awakens came out, and I primarily made theory videos back when I, and I think most fans, were eagerly anticipating The Last Jedi, thinking it was going to, at the very least, try to answer some of the questions from Episode 7 in the most satisfying of ways. And back then, I'd always say that one of the keys to the success of this new trilogy was the dynamic that would be built, and one would have to be built between Rey and Kylo Ren. That you couldn't just have it be this simple story of Kylo Ren on the dark against Rey on the light. That there needed to be something personal between these two. For example, just imagine if in the original trilogy we never got the Darth Vader is Luke's father twist. Now sure, Luke still has a personal reason to want to stop him since Vader killed his father, but he has no real reason to want to try to save him, which means a much different ending to Return of the Jedi. One that's unlikely to be anywhere near as great as the one we did get. Anyway, back in those pre-Episode 8 days, I made a Reylo video. And yeah, you did hear that right. I made a Reylo video where I theorized that maybe Luke wouldn't be the answer Rey was looking for, and that the truth about her parents would be revealed by Kylo Ren, and that this would push her closer to him. That Kylo's plan all along was to get her to join him, so that they could take out Snoke together and rule the galaxy. And if you have some level of morbid curiosity, I'll link that video in the description below. Hell, it might be worth checking out simply because it doesn't start with me saying now, it was before those days. And for some reason in it, I also use a really high-pitched voice, which I don't have any sort of explanation for. I guess it could be evidence that, as time has gone by, I've at least gotten a little bit better at making these videos. But seriously here, one of the reasons I've said many times since The Last Jedi came out that I would have much preferred Rey take Kylo Ren's hand towards the end of the movie, that she join him on the dark side apparently, is not only does it show Rey is capable of making a potentially horrible mistake, and not only does it make the movie itself better, I think, though it still has other problems, don't get me wrong, but it gives us something to be intrigued about going into the last movie in the trilogy. We'd be wondering about Rey right now. What's going to happen to her? Will she find a way to come back to the light, or will she slip further to the dark side? And will they really subvert our expectations by making her the big bad villain of the whole trilogy? The other problem with not taking his hand is Rey has now flat out rejected the dark side, and she got away from yet another direct encounter with Kylo Ren in the process, one she herself foolishly sought out or fell for, and she ended up with just a cut on the arm and with, supposedly, the emotional distress of not saving the guy she met a few days ago, the guy who had murdered his own father right before her eyes, and split open the back of her best friend Finn. Oh, and we can't forget to mention, he also tried to mentally torture her. And yeah, I know some of you will want to point out that Luke resisted Vader's dark side offer in The Empire Strikes Back, which is true. But Luke also got his ass kicked by Vader in that movie and had to be saved by his friends. And when they were all escaping from the Empire at the end of the film, being chased by TIE fighters, Luke was a bit too busy clutching at where his hand had been, asking Obi-Wan why he'd been lied to about his father, to man the guns. While Rey, with a smile on her face saying how much she likes this, was instead in a gunner's chair, both hands on the controls, taking out 3 TIE fighters in one shot. She'd then go on to lift about 100 tons of rock to save everyone, whereas again, Luke was the one who needed to be saved by his friends. And no, I don't mean to turn this into a contest of who had it worse, or to imply that Rey is a bad character simply because she doesn't suffer as much as Luke did, or seems to be more powerful with less training than him. In fact, I'm even working on a video that takes a closer look at the character of Rey, the good and the bad, which I hope to have up soon. Instead here, I'd argue that they missed a chance to do something really interesting both for the character and the story by having Rey take Kylo Ren's hand, which doesn't even mean she's going to fall to the dark side per se. Perhaps she did it because she thought pretending to join him was the only way to save him in the end. Which goes along with what I was saying before. If The Last Jedi ends with them together, we'd be left wondering right now, what in the world is Rey doing? What are her true motives for joining him? Is she going to really fall to the dark side and become the villain? Or was it some sort of plan she had to save him? Either way, we the audience have something very specific to be looking forward to in the next movie. Instead of maybe hoping Kylo Ren now finds a way to be able to compete with Rey next time they face off, especially with Snoke being gone. And as I've said many times before, the real reason Palpatine is coming back in Episode 9 is because we need a legitimate or credible threat, and Kylo Ren simply isn't it. And honestly here, if Kylo Ren and Rey had been set up right, they wouldn't have needed another villain in Episode 9. They could have, more or less, put it all right on them. I mean, imagine Rey joins Kylo at the end of Episode 8. And then in Episode 9, it's all about her falling further and further to the dark side, and getting more and more powerful as it happens. That they try to turn the whole Mary Sue argument around and make her the ultimate villain because of how strong she is with the Force. And while this is happening, while she slips away, Kylo, who actually does care about her or comes to love her, begins to come back to the light because he wants to save her from this dark fate. And in the end, we learn the purpose of Rey all along was to bring Ben Solo back to the light, to save the last Skywalker and the Jedi Order he was meant to rebuild after Luke had failed, which is why she was drawn to him in the first place, and why they have this bond that Snoke claimed to put in place. The movie then ends with a duel between the two, where Rey truly hates Kylo Ren, or Ben Solo now, because he made her fall to the dark side, and now he wants her to reject it, when she doesn't feel like she can do that anymore, or even wants to do that, that the power within her is too much for her to overcome or to resist. And thus, again, everyone upset about her being a Mary Sue will learn that her power was actually her weakness all along. But that's not how this story is going to end. And many of you out there are probably rolling your eyes that I would even suggest that they'd let Rey fall to the dark side and end up being the villain of the story, which is probably why that glimpse we got of Dark Side Rey in that D23 footage was met with so much skepticism, because people just don't believe they'd ever do that with Rey, that they'd let the new Disney princess fall to the dark side, and honestly, neither do I. Nevertheless here, according to Daisy Ridley, they are going to explore Reylo further in Episode 9, and in a very recent interview she said, "Obviously there's this whole Reylo thing, and some people are very passionate about it, some aren't. JJ does deal with it in the movie. It's a very complex issue. People talk about toxic relationships and whatever it is. It's no joke, and I think it's dealt with really well because it's not skimmed over." And after reading that, I'm sorry Reylo fans, but if I had to translate it or read between the lines of what she's trying to say here, to me it sounds like Daisy Ridley is saying that they will make a point of showing us Rey rejecting Kylo Ren or Ben Solo on some sort of romantic level in this final movie. I really just can't see her referring to Reylo as a toxic relationship and then them ending up together in this movie. And this isn't the first time she said something like this. Back at Star Wars Celebration this year, she said of Reylo, "I don't know how I feel about it because everyone is talking about the toxic thing of the relationship. It's essentially emotional. It's a tricky road. I do feel like deep down, Kylo feels like what he is doing is right and he doesn't think he's wrong. But he's also killed so many people. So I can't really get behind it, no. Not in a personal way, you know. Well, maybe there's redemption, who knows." Okay, so taking all the bits of information that we know for sure about this movie, all these little quotes and such, and ignoring all the leaks and rumors, I really feel like the gist of this movie will be that Kylo Ren is being tricked by Palpatine and is serving him. Rey then later reveals to Kylo Ren that he's being tricked, and this is what begins his turn back to the light side, though not immediately. They'll of course have a big fight at first. There will also be a visit from Anakin who tells him what really happened on the second Death Star. And all of this is why Kylo will begin to truly care about Rey and come back to the light side. Towards the end of the movie, Rey will then face off against Palpatine alone, and she won't be able to defeat him, of course. But never fear, the newly returned to the light Ben Solo will show up, and the two of them will team up to fight Palpatine together, and they'll succeed, or think they'll succeed. Kylo, or Ben at this point, then professes his love for Rey, that she is his light. But she turns him down, saying that not all between them could ever be forgiven or forgotten, which of course angers Ben, and maybe he'll fall back to the dark side. But before that can happen one way or the other, we find out that Palpatine wasn't quite dead, and Kylo will have to make the choice between siding with Palpatine, who was trying to trick him, and siding with Rey, who has now turned him down. In the end, of course, he picks to side with Rey, and they take out Palpatine together, for good this time. But Kylo has to give his life to do so, which, yes, does sound a hell of a lot like the end of Return of the Jedi, but mimicking the end of that movie in some way wouldn't surprise me in the least. And who knows here, maybe Reylo fans would really like that ending, even though they don't end up happily ever after together. And by all means, if anyone who loves the idea of Reylo is watching this, tell me what you think of such a storyline. And mind you, I'm not saying this is how I want the movie to go. I can just see it happening this way, or very similar to this. Either way, we know Reylo is going to be touched on, at least according to Rey herself, Daisy Ridley, but that also according to her, she at least views it as a toxic relationship, which maybe is her just personally not getting behind it, which then doesn't mean for certain it's not going to happen. It's just her way of letting us know she's not going to approve of the ending. In closing here, I gotta be honest. I'd be stunned if episode 9 is Rey and Ben Solo riding off into the twin sunset together happily ever after. For one, I can't imagine there isn't going to be some sort of bittersweet type component to the ending of this movie. And that's even if Rey doesn't just flat out reject Ben Solo, assuming he does or will fall for her, which I honestly don't think has currently been conveyed in the movies. I think Kylo Ren has only seen Rey as something to be used thus far. Or, of course, I could be way off here, and episode 9 will be really something different or try to create some sort of really unique dynamic between these two characters, and the ending will be something that nobody could ever see coming, which would certainly be a surprise in itself. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn, Reylo fan or not, to tell me what you think about Daisy Ridley's most recent comments, or what you think about my idea for Reylo, which would have seen Rey joining Kylo at the end of episode 8, or what you think about the possible way I could see episode 9 ending, with Rey rejecting Kylo Ren. Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.